Mason Ryder kissed the alien statue because 6 days of freezing, starving, and arguing inside a dead moon vault had pushed the whole team past good judgment and straight into dark humor. He pressed 2 fingers to the crystal cheek first, looked back at Harper Quinn with a tired grin and said, "If this wakes up and marries me, you're all witnesses." Harper, crouched beside a dead control spine with a light pen between her teeth, laughed despite herself. "Mason, that is the dumbest possible way to die. That's still not a no." Logan Pierce snorted from the shattered doorway where he was standing watch. "Do it. I want the official report to ruin somebody's career." So Mason leaned in and kissed the statue. For 1 perfect second, nothing happened. Dylan Cross made a disappointed sound. "Wow, even ancient alien royalty thinks you're annoying." Then the statue opened its eyes. White gold light hit the chamber so hard it felt solid. The vault floor jumped under their boots. Dead lines in the walls lit up like veins under skin, racing in branching patterns through black crystal and silver metal buried beneath frost. A low hum rose from somewhere deep below them, not mechanical exactly, more like a giant throat clearing after 1,000 years of silence. Nobody moved. Harper slowly stood. Jax Mercer, half buried in an access panel he had been bullying for the last hour, lifted his head and said very calmly, "I would like it noted that I hated this moon before it became haunted." The statue turned its face toward Mason. It was taller than any of them by a full head and carved from translucent mineral that had looked dead until now. Up close, it no longer looked carved at all. It looked paused. Its eyes burned with a soft, impossible intelligence, and the gold running through the chamber converged at its chest, where a pendant-shaped hollow began to glow. A voice filled the room, not from speakers, not from air, from everywhere at once, like the sound had been waiting inside the stone, inside the floor, inside the blood in Mason's ears. Line extinguished. Claim impossible. Contact unauthorized. Recognition engaged. Logan took 1 step forward, rifle half raised. "Yeah, that's not a sentence I enjoy." Harper stared at the statue, her face going pale in the light. "It's reading us. Can we unread ourselves?" Dylan asked. "No," Ava Bennett said, already moving closer with her med scanner out, because Ava's first instinct in any crisis was to act like panic was for less qualified people. "But I'd love everyone to stop standing directly in front of the glowing Death Queen." Mason should have backed away. Every survival instinct he had was screaming at him to put distance between himself and the thing he had just kissed awake. But he couldn't. The statue's eyes were fixed on him, and somewhere beneath the fear was a strange pull. Not mind control, not hypnosis, just the sickening feeling that a lock had turned and he had heard it happen inside himself. Then Harper made a sharp sound, one hand flying to her throat. The others turned. Around her neck, beneath the collar of her thermal suit, something was shining. "What is that?" Logan demanded. Harper pulled out a chain she had worn so long nobody thought about it anymore. A tiny metal charm she once said she'd found in a junk market on Ceres when she was 16. Only it was not a dull scrap now. It was a pendant, old and geometric and blazing white gold like it had just remembered its own name. Jax's optic narrowed with an electric click. "Okay, new rule. We inventory everyone's mysterious childhood jewelry before missions." The statue extended one hand. Light arced from its palm to Harper's pendant. The chamber answered instantly. Frozen consoles flashed awake. Dust lifted in spirals. Rings of ancient script unfurled across the ceiling in circles so huge they disappeared into shadow. Mason felt the pressure change, like the whole vault had sealed itself around them and started breathing. Harper's voice came out thin. "Mason!" He was already moving. He grabbed her arm just as the nearest wall split open with a thundercrack and a shelf of crystal rotated out from inside the stone. Resting in its center was a second pendant, larger than Harper's, set beside a dark prism full of swirling static. "Recognition complete," the voice said. "Bloodline deviation accepted. Archive fragment released. Throne signal restored." "Throne," Dylan repeated. "Absolutely not. I reject any story with a throne in it." Then every alarm on their suits went off at once. Ethan Cole's voice burst over comms from Starfong overhead, chopped by interference but loud enough to cut through the chamber. Mason, answer me right now. Something just lit up on every scan we have. You've got incoming ships dropping out fast. Logan swore and ran to the doorway scanner. How fast? Raider fast, Ethan shot back. Multiple signatures. They were dark until your little archaeology date triggered a beacon. A deep impact rolled through the moon. Dust rained from the ceiling. Somewhere far above, metal screamed. Jax shoved himself upright and yanked a compact cutter free. Good news. The haunted statue is no longer our biggest problem. There is no good news in that sentence, Ava said. Harper couldn't stop staring at the floating script overhead. It called it a throne signal. Mason looked at her pendant, then at the waiting relic in the wall shelf, then back at the impossible figure watching them with patient, ancient eyes. Take it, the statue said. This time the voice was smaller, focused, personal. Not to all of them. To him. Mason blinked. What? Take it, it repeated. Logan was beside him in an instant. No, absolutely not. We are not taking instructions from space royalty because you made out with a monument. Another impact hit. Harder this time. Ethan came back over comms. You have maybe 3 minutes before they land on top of the vault. Ava pointed at the relic shelf. Either grab the glowing nightmare package or leave it. But decide now. Harper met Mason's eyes. Fear was there, but so was something else, something steady and dangerous and weirdly trusting. If that signal is tied to me, she said, we don't leave answers behind. That decided it. Mason reached into the shelf, took the pendant, and grabbed the dark prism with his other hand. The moment his skin touched both, the statue's face changed. Not anger, grief. The entire chamber flashed white. Coordinates slammed across every screen. Star maps, unknown systems, dead empires, a crown-shaped seal burning through static. Mason staggered as voices whispered in a language he did not know and somehow almost understood. Then the statue looked directly at Harper and smiled. The moon shook with the first Raider breach charge hitting the outer vault. Over comms, Ethan shouted, "Move now!" The statue's light began to collapse inward. The script overhead folded into a single burning ring. The chamber doors unlocked with a booming clang. As Mason turned to run with Harper, Logan, Ava, Dylan, and Jax at his heels, the ancient voice followed them into the dark like a sentence history had just remembered how to say. Human contact confirmed. Throne line awakened. Prepare Earth. Starfong limped away from the frozen moon with one thruster coughing plasma and half her warning panels lit like a bad city at midnight. The ship smelled of hot wiring, engine coolant, and the sharp medicinal sting Ava Bennett had brought to the med bay after patching up 3 people, 1 cracked rib, and Jax Mercer's deeply offended shoulder actuator. Nobody said much at first. They were too tired, too wired, and too aware that something impossible was now locked in the forward containment locker behind 3 layers of steel and a prayer nobody believed in. Harper Quinn stood in front of that locker anyway. The pendant rested in her palm, glowing softly, white gold under the dim strip lights. It had gone quiet since they left the vault, but not dead. More like listening. Mason leaned against the bulkhead beside her, arms folded, trying not to look like a man who had slept a total of 19 minutes in 2 days. You should be in medical. Harper didn't look at him. So should you. Yeah. But I'm more annoying horizontal. That got the corner of her mouth to twitch. It vanished fast. Behind them, the containment field hummed around the prism they had pulled from the wall shelf on the moon. It was dark now, its surface packed with swirling fractures that caught light and buried it. Ethan Cole had already run every scan Starfong could manage and come back with the scientific equivalent of "I hate this." Jax rolled in on a maintenance stool, one boot dragging because he had repaired the actuator with what looked suspiciously like cookware. Good news. The magic necklace is still impossible. Better news. The angry paperweight next to it is somehow worse. Logan Pierce stepped into the corridor carrying a mug of something that steamed like a chemical weapon. He handed it to Mason without asking. Ethan says the pendant isn't broadcasting anymore. Anymore? Harper repeated. That was my favorite word too, Logan said. Mason took the mug, smelled it, then looked at his brother. Did you make this? No. Good. I'd rather survive the aliens first. A chime cut across the corridor. Ethan's voice came over ship comms, flat and controlled in the way that meant he was very close to yelling. Bridge. Now. All of you. The bridge lights were lowered to combat red by the time they got there. Outside the forward glass, the debris belt stretched like a graveyard scattered by a giant hand. Broken hull plates, engine frames, shattered cargo drums, old station ribs, and chunks of rock turned slowly through black space, all reflecting the cold, distant glow of a blue star off the port side. It should have been good cover. Instead, tactical displays were filling with new contacts, each one blinking hostile in neat, tightening vectors. Dylan Cross looked up from weapons and exhaled once through his nose. Well, that seems rude. How many? Mason asked. Ethan threw the count onto the central table. More than enough. Ava moved to the rear console and studied the approach lines. They tracked us from the moon? No, Harper said quietly. Everyone looked at her. She was staring at the pendant in her hand. They tracked this. Nobody argued. Ethan expanded the data. We have 7 raider ships coming in hard, plus 2 heavier signatures holding back outside the belt. They're not firing yet. They want us boxed before they commit. Jax tilted his head. That is a very unhealthy amount of attention for one salvage ship. I preferred us when we were nobodies with wiring problems. Mason stepped to the display, mind already moving. Starfang could run, but not fast enough. Fight, but not cleanly. Hide maybe for 30 seconds. The raiders had speed, numbers, and certainty. And certainty humans had learned over and over could be used against people who trusted it too much. Logan walked up on the other side of the table, reading the same pattern. Mason didn't even have to turn to know what expression he wore. The twin thing was not telepathy. It was worse. It was years of shared instincts, bad ideas, and the dangerous comfort of knowing exactly when the other one was about to do something reckless. Mason tapped the outer debris ring. What's the mass spread? Ethan answered immediately. Dense on the south arc, metallic concentrations all through the spine. Probably old convoy wreckage. Logan pointed 2 fingers at a drifting fuel carrier split down the middle. And if that becomes a reactor casualty? Dylan looked between them. I know that face. That face means I'm about to hate this plan. Harper set the pendant on the command rail and leaned in. Talk. Mason zoomed the field. We don't outrun them. We become a ship they don't bother fearing. Logan picked it up from there. We vent power, fake a cascading drive failure, dump debris trails like we're losing containment, and drift straight into the thickest part of the belt. Ethan caught on next. Make them think we're crippled and panicking. Jax's grin was thin and ugly in the red light. Then we teach them that human panic has layers. Ava folded her arms. You want to lure a superior force into unstable wreckage while pretending to die on purpose. Yes, Mason said. She sighed. Okay, just checking how insane we were being. The bridge turned sharp and fast. Ethan rewrote Starfang's emissions to mimic a failing reactor. Jax rigged maintenance charges into the cargo launchers and packed them with cut metal, frozen coolant rods, and anything else that would turn drifting junk into shrapnel at the right moment. Dylan armed the dorsal cannons but kept them cold. Ava secured med bay and prepped for decompression injuries. Harper stood at the sensor board with the pendant around her neck again, listening to frequencies she could not explain but somehow understood enough to call range shifts before the displays refreshed. Mason worked beside Logan in a silence that felt almost calm. South Channel in 90 seconds, Logan said. I know. They'll split on the drift pattern. I know. Logan glanced at him then, just once. You good? Mason gave the kind of smile people used when the answer was no and they both knew it. Ask me after. Starfang began to die beautifully. Lights flickered deck by deck. Plasma output sagged on every scanner the enemy could see. Heat bloom vented in ragged bursts off the stern. Ethan even routed a fake distress burst into open space, broken enough to sound real. The raiders took the bait. 3 rushed ahead, eager and sloppy. 2 more flanked wide through the debris. The heavy ships held back exactly where Mason had hoped, waiting for the easy finish once Starfang was cornered. Now? Dylan asked. Not yet, Mason said. A shattered station ring drifted across their bow, huge and skeletal, masking them for 2 precious seconds. Now, Logan said. Starfang rolled hard. Jax punched the launch. Cargo canisters blew out in a scatter pattern, then burst among the debris cloud. The belt came alive. Fuel pockets ignited. Metal plates spun into collision paths. Coolant rods flashed to vapor. Hidden charges kicked dead wreckage into accelerating lines that looked random unless you were human enough to build chaos on purpose. The lead raider vanished in a white bloom. The second took a torn engine block through the cockpit. The third juked clear just in time to eat Dylan's first real shot dead center. Okay, Dylan said, impressed despite himself. That was mean. The flanking ships opened fire blind and hit drifting wrecks, triggering secondary blasts all through the South Arc. For 10 glorious, impossible seconds, the stronger force forgot it was stronger. Then the heavy ships moved. Their first salvo tore along Starfang's port side and lit half the bridge in sparks. Consoles blew. Alarms screamed. The ship yawed so hard Harper would have hit the deck if Mason hadn't caught her. Ethan's voice cracked. They've got angle on us now. We don't have another pass. Logan saw it before anyone else. A tug docked in the rear maintenance cradle. Old, ugly, barely spaceworthy, but powered and independent. Mason saw Logan see it. No, Mason said immediately. Logan didn't look at him. You know this is it. No. Harper turned from the rail, hearing the tone more than the words. Logan moved fast, already stripping command bands off his wrist. The heavies won't stop for Starfang if they think the artifact is leaving in a smaller target. I pull them off. You take the belt gap and burn. Mason grabbed his arm. Hard. We find another way. Logan finally met his eyes, and the bridge seemed to narrow around that look. Little brother, Logan said softly, even though he was older by 4 minutes and only used that line when he wanted Mason off balance. We are the other way. Another impact slammed the hull. Ava shouted from aft. Decide now or die indecisive. Jack spun in his chair. As shipboard philosophers go, she's having a strong day. Logan pulled free, shoved the command bands into Mason's hand, and headed for the rear hatch. Mason followed 2 steps before Harper caught his wrist. Not to stop him, to steady him. He needs you to do your part, she said. That was the cruel truth of loving brave people. Sometimes supporting them felt exactly like betrayal. The tug launched 30 seconds later. On sensors, Ethan tagged it with the pendant signature, the fake command burst, and enough stolen power markers to make it look priceless. The heavy raiders turned almost instantly. Logan's voice came over the private channel, somehow calm over all the alarms. See? Alien pattern recognition. Very flattering. Mason stood frozen at the glass as the tiny tug burned away through wreckage and fire, dragging the hunters after it like a lit fuse through dry grass. Logan, don't make this sentimental, his brother cut in. It's gross. Then softer, for Mason alone. Get them out. The tug vanished into the burning debris field. A heartbeat later, the sky folded into fire and static. Mason Ryder kept Starfang moving because if the ship stopped, grief would finally catch up. Weeks had passed since the debris belt. Maybe more. Time felt slippery out here, cut into fuel calculations, jump windows, repair cycles, and the slow, unkind rhythm of people learning how to work around an absence that still took up space in every room. Logan's mug stayed clipped beside the bridge rail because nobody touched it. His bunk remained half-made. Mason told himself it was temporary. Everybody knew better. Outside the cockpit glass, a red dwarf washed the hull in dim, rust-colored light as Starfang drifted above a nameless gas giant. They were hiding in the giant's magnetic shadow while Ethan Cole scrubbed their drives and Jax Mercer argued with a maintenance drone like it had personally insulted his ancestors. You are a wheel with opinions, Jax muttered, tightening a panel clamp with one hand and slapping the drone away with the other. Pick a lane. The drone beeped indignantly. Dylan Cross looked up from the floor where he was sorting power cells. You know, one day the machines are gonna unionize against you. They can try, Jax said. I have documentation proving they're emotionally unstable. That pulled a real laugh from Ava Bennett, which was rare enough these days to make people glance toward the sound. She was perched at the galley table with her boots up, reading scan results and pretending not to monitor everyone's stress levels at the same time. Mason entered, grabbed a cold cup of coffee that had given up on life hours ago, and glanced toward the sealed lab at the end of the corridor. Harper Quinn had been in there most of the day again. The shard they had pulled from the moon sat inside a containment cradle surrounded by cables, hollow screens, and code trees that changed shape when anyone besides Harper got too close. It did not behave like normal data storage. Some days it acted corrupted. Other days it acted selective. Whenever Harper touched the pendant and spoke into the field, new fragments opened like doors deciding she had finally knocked correctly. Mason found her alone in the blue-white glow of the lab, hair tied up badly, sleeves rolled, eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. The shard floated between two emitters, throwing fractured symbols across her face like light through stained glass. You missed dinner, he said. She didn't turn. I had crackers. That is not dinner. That is surrender. Depends on the crackers. He stepped beside her and looked at the rotating symbols. Anything? Harper exhaled slowly. Yeah, too much. That got his attention. She touched the pendant at her throat, and a ring of script widened over the console. This time Mason could almost follow it. Not the language but the structure. Family trees, authority lines, command routes branching through worlds he had never heard of. It wasn't just a kingdom, Harper said. It was a stabilizing network. These relics linked houses, fleets, archives, defense systems, all of it. Not by fear, by obligation. Mason frowned. That sounds suspiciously noble for ancient power. I know. She opened another layer. This one was uglier. Broken seals, blacked out names, sudden gaps where whole lines had been erased. It didn't collapse on its own, Harper said. It was gutted. Internal betrayal, competing blood claims, people wanting access to command without accepting the cost that came with it. Mason rested both hands on the console and stared at the ruined history turning in the air. And now they think you're part of that? Harper looked at him then, tired and furious and a little scared in a way she hated admitting. Not part. Necessary. He went still. She swallowed. Mason, I think this pendant identifies me as a surviving key. Maybe not the only one, but enough. The words sat between them like an airlock failing to seal. He wanted to tell her it was impossible. That she was Harper Quinn, salvage linguist, stubborn pain in his neck, worst card player in 3 sectors, not some lost heir to a dead interstellar command line. But the pendant pulsed as if hearing him think, and the shard answered with a low harmonic note that made the glass under their hands vibrate. A warning chime snapped through the ship. Ethan's voice hit the overhead speakers fast and clipped. Bridge. Now, I found something weird. On the bridge, every display had gone dark except one. A single waveform crawled across the central screen, fragmented and unstable, stitched together from carrier frequencies Starfong had never used. Old symbols ringed the transmission in a crown-like seal. Harper had just shown Mason in the archive tree. Ethan looked up from the comm station, pale and wired. It came in through a dead band. There should be nothing there. Jax rolled in behind Ava, took one look and said, That signal looks expensive. Harper stepped closer. The pendant lit immediately. The waveform sharpened. Static flooded the bridge speakers. Then a voice pushed through it, broken, distant, unmistakable. Mason, if this reaches you, do not answer on open channels. Mason forgot how to breathe. Dylan was already on his feet. Ava's hand went to the edge of the console hard enough to whiten her knuckles. Ethan's eyes flicked toward Mason, then away again. The voice crackled, buried under interference. Tired, rougher than before. Alive. I'm under with them, Logan said. Name I'm using won't matter to you. Listen instead. Mason moved to the screen like the distance itself offended him. Logan. The transmission skipped, then recovered. They're not chasing the relics to sell them, Logan continued. They're collecting access. The pendant, the shard, bloodline identifiers. They're preparing something called the Nexus Gate. Harper whispered. No. Logan kept talking. Fast now, like he had seconds and knew it. If they open it before we understand what it is, Earth won't even know it's in the story until the story lands on top of it. Static surged. The screen tore sideways. Then Logan's voice came back one last time, low and urgent, and aimed straight at his brother. Mason, whatever you think this is, it's bigger. And Harper. He cut off. The signal shifted. A second voice entered the channel, smooth, alien, and very close. We know she is there. Then the bridge lights died. Logan Pierce learned very quickly that survival inside enemy space had almost nothing to do with being fearless. Fearless people did dramatic things. Dramatic people got noticed. Noticed people got cataloged, tracked, and eventually scraped off corridor floors by guards who never bothered learning their names. So Logan became boring. He wore a maintenance badge stamped with the stolen name Corvin Hale and moved through the occupied frontier fortress with a limp just slight enough to look permanent. Burn scars hid beneath the collar seal of enemy armor he had trimmed, dirted, and repaired until it matched the station crew around him. He kept his head down. He carried tools. He apologized to people in hallways. He learned which supervisors liked obedience, which ones liked cruelty, and which ones liked pretending those were different things. The fortress hung over a fractured trade world like a steel storm cloud. All stacked gun platforms, docking prongs, and black glass towers lit from below by refinery fires. Cargo moved day and night. So did prisoners. Logan watched everything. Kitchen workers noticed which officers drank more on execution days. Sanitation crews knew which elevators skipped public logs. Dock teams counted sealed containers no customs chain ever signed for. Trafficked civilians passed through intake with shaved heads and dead eyes. Remembered voices, insignias, and the smell of chemical labs hidden 3 levels below legal maps. Tyrants loved sensors. They trusted numbers, scanners, and command trees. Logan trusted people everybody else had decided did not matter. That was how the network started. A bent spoon placed upside down on a meal cart meant a guard rotation had changed. A torn green thread tied around a coolant pipe meant contraband had made it through. A maintenance request filed with 2 spelling errors instead of 1 meant a prisoner transfer was actually a relic convoy. It spread quietly, person by person, held together by fear, hunger, spite, and the stubborn human refusal to stay sorted like cargo. One night, while rerouting water pressure on level 12, Logan ducked into a service niche and found a child sitting behind the pipe lattice with a stolen biscuit and a homemade knife. She looked maybe 10, maybe younger. Hard to tell in places like this. You're in my wall, she said. Logan crouched slowly. Fair criticism. She studied him with flat, old eyes. You're not one of them. That obvious? You say thank you to kitchen people. He almost smiled. Dead giveaway. The girl nodded toward the corridor. They moved 6 from blue intake. Didn't log it. Where? Down. She hesitated. You helping or just collecting sad facts? Logan held her gaze. Helping. She considered that, then handed him half the biscuit like she was investing in him. Then stop walking like you want revenge. Walk like you hate overtime. That advice saved his life twice in the next week. On Starfong, things were louder. Not physically. The ship was running quiet, hidden in the seam between legal routes and forgotten space. But the emotional pressure had nowhere to go. Mason Ryder wanted movement, answers, impact. Harper Quinn wanted time with the shard, the pendant, and the strange threads of old command architecture only she seemed able to hear. Both were right, which made every discussion worse. The argument started in the map room over coffee and got sharper from there. We have his location region, Mason said, stabbing a finger toward the projected fortress sectors. That is more than we had yesterday. We hit supply lanes, force a diversion, grab whoever we can, and pull Logan out before they move him. Harper stood across the table with the pendant hanging bright against her throat and the shard's rotating symbols reflected in her eyes. You do not have his location. You have a contaminated relay path from a compromised channel inside enemy territory. Mason's jaw tightened. Close enough. No, her voice stayed level, which somehow made it hit harder. Close enough is how people die when old systems are involved. Dylan Cross leaned against the hatch, wisely pretending to be furniture. Ava Bennett looked from one to the other and quietly slid the hot kettle farther from the center of the table, like she had experience with avoidable splash damage. Mason dragged a hand through his hair. Harper. Every day we wait gives them more time, and every blind jump gives them more chances to make us predictable. She shot back. The shard is mapping routes under the routes. Old royal transit layers. They don't show up on standard scans. If we move before I can finish this, we walk into whatever they already think we'll do. He looked at the pendant with open frustration. That thing keeps choosing the worst possible timing. The moment the words left him, the shard flared. A ring of pale script burst across the table, spinning so fast everyone stepped back. Harper sucked in a breath and grabbed the console edge. Images flashed through the air in fragments. Sealed corridors, hidden gateways, emblem walls, star charts folded around symbols that looked more ceremonial than military and somehow more dangerous for it. Jax Mercer rolled in from the hall carrying an open panel and a coil of wire over one shoulder. He took one look inside. I see the haunted jewelry is still committed to workplace disruption. Ethan Cole's voice came over the room speaker. Harper, tell me you're recording that. I am trying to stay standing, she said through clenched teeth. The symbols slowed. One route remained lit. It cut past known patrol sectors, through dead coordinates and red zone space, then terminated at a single word in old command script the shard translated into modern trade tongue with chilling clarity. Nexus. The room went still. Mason stared at it. That's where they're headed. Harper nodded once, breathing hard. Not just headed. Building toward. Before anyone could say more, Ethan broke into the room channel again. Louder this time. Harper. Mason. I've got a packet coming through on the ghost frequency. Mason was moving before the sentence ended. The bridge lights dimmed as they entered. Ethan had isolated the signal onto a private board, shielding it from wider ship systems in case the enemy was piggybacking something nasty behind it. Static rolled across the screen, then a face resolved in ugly fragments. Part shadow, part distortion, but unmistakable. Logan. This time the transmission held. He was wearing enemy armor. One side of his face bruised yellow-green. His eyes harder than Mason remembered and twice as alert. Behind him, some kind of service duct rattled with distant machine noise. Mason, Logan said low and fast. Do not react to seeing me. Assume this line has seconds. Mason laughed once, broken and angry and relieved all at once. That advice is late. A flicker of warmth crossed Logan's face and vanished. Good. Means you're still impossible. Harper stepped beside Mason. Logan, we found the route marker. Nexus. His expression changed immediately. Then listen carefully. The relic hunts aren't separate operations. They're assembling a lock sequence. Bloodline objects, archive shards, command seals. They need a living interface at the end. Harper already knew the answer, but she asked anyway. Me? Yes. Logan glanced off screen, hearing something. They don't want you dead. They want you present when the final mechanism turns. Mason's hand curled into a fist. Then we hit them first. You hit them smart, Logan said. This is bigger than a fortress grab. The Nexus isn't a vault. It's a threshold. Behind Logan, a door hissed open. His eyes snapped sideways. His voice dropped to a knife edge. I have to move. But hear this part. When they say throne, they don't mean symbol. They mean access. And someone above this station already knows Harper carries it. The screen glitched. A new shadow filled the doorway behind him. Tall, armored, elegant in a way that made menace feel deliberate. Logan looked back once, straight into the camera, straight through the noise, and Mason felt the old twin certainty hit him like a strike. Trouble. Immediate. No bluff left. Then Logan spoke 4 final words. They're bringing her alive. The transmission cut to black. Mason Ryder hated elegant places on principle. Anything with polished black floors, floating chandeliers, and waitstaff who moved like they had been trained by knives made him want to check exits, count armed guards, and steal silverware out of pure irritation. The court station called itself the Celestial Pavilion. Mason called it a bad idea with expensive lighting. Above them, a false night sky curved across the ballroom dome, crowded with projected stars so bright and perfect they looked almost insulting. Below, nobles in layered silk, armored governors, relic brokers, and smiling predators drifted through music and candle-colored light, pretending war was something that happened to less interesting people. Every laugh sounded rehearsed. Every handshake looked armed. Harper Quinn stood beside Mason at the top of the grand stair in a dark formal coat fitted over concealed armor weave. Her hair pinned back with a silver clasp that doubled as a comm relay. On her wrist glimmered a bond thread bracelet Ava had fastened herself 30 minutes earlier with the kind of professional comm that suggested she approved of exactly none of this. "You look like you're about to rob the orchestra," Harper murmured without moving her lips. Mason offered the room his most charming fake smile. "That's because I'm trying to blend in. You're failing." "Good. I like to keep expectations realistic." From orbit, Ethan Cole fed them camera loops and floor maps through subvocal comms. Somewhere deeper in station systems, Jax Mercer was forging attendance trails, guest records, and bloodline certifications with the digital body language of a man who considered fraud an art form. His voice crackled softly in Mason's ear. "You two are now Lord and Lady Vale of the Seventh Drift. Married 3 years, no children, mild scandal involving mineral tariffs. I made you boring on purpose." "Thanks," Mason muttered. "You're welcome. Also, if anyone asks about your ancestral crest, act offended and leave. That buys me 90 more seconds." A server passed with a tray of crystal drinks. Mason took one, handed it to Harper, and scanned the room. Their target lay beneath the central court, inside a restricted archive tier accessible only to hereditary guests and recognized bonded pairs invited into the ceremonial procession. That was the catch. The station's old gate logic would not open for matching credentials alone. It wanted symbolic unity, shared vows, public recognition. Pair. Harper sipped once, then quietly said, "This may be the first mission where eye contact is the dangerous part." Mason glanced at her. "You're saying I'm distracting?" "I'm saying if you keep looking at me like that, some countess is going to assume we're either deeply in love or very bad at espionage." A warm pulse flickered at Harper's throat where the pendant rested beneath the fabric. Mason pretended not to notice. He was getting very good at pretending not to notice the way old alien technology seemed personally invested in their emotional problems. At the far end of the ballroom, a trio of musicians began playing something soft and slow. The crowd shifted. Partners turned toward the center floor beneath the artificial stars. Ethan spoke in their ears. "Ceremonial round starting. That's your opening. Archive gate is keyed to pair procession." Harper exhaled once. "Right?" Mason set his untouched drink on a passing tray and offered his hand. "Lady Vale." She took it. That should have felt tactical. Temporary. A move in a larger game. Instead, the moment her fingers settled into his, everything sharpened. The music, the lights, the room, the danger. They descended into the dance with every camera on them and every lie balanced on the edge of one wrong heartbeat. Mason guided her carefully through the measured turns, not because he was a born court dancer, but because he had spent enough years in tight corridors and unstable situations to understand weight, timing, and trust. Harper moved with surprising grace, her eyes lifting to his only when the steps required it. "This is insane," she murmured. "I've done worse for good intel." "No, you haven't." "Fair." They rotated past a governor in bone-white armor and a relic collector whose smile looked tax-deductible. Above them, the fake constellations changed formation, becoming ceremonial patterns tied to old marriage rites from half a dozen conquered worlds. The station loved symbolism. It made people easier to manipulate when they thought they were participating in beauty. Halfway through the second turn, Harper's hand tightened on his. 3 watchers at the North Arch, she said. I saw 2. The third is pretending to be bored. That's my least favorite kind. He smiled outwardly at nothing while adjusting their path by inches. Across the room, Ava entered from the western balcony in the severe black of court medical staff, carrying a scanned slate and the expression of a woman medically prepared to ruin anyone's evening. Her voice came over comms. Medical records are clean. Your bond signatures will hold for 8 minutes. After that, Jax says your marriage becomes mathematically suspicious. Jax cut in at once. I said romantically inconsistent, which is a much sadder crime. Harper nearly laughed and had to hide it by dipping her head. The dance concluded before a raised ceremonial platform where paired guests were expected to exchange a vow phrase before descending into the honored procession. Mason had known this part was coming. Knowing did not help. A court herald raised a hand. State your union before the sky remembers you. For one dangerous second, Mason forgot the script. Harper looked at him. Not like an operative. Not like a claimant carrying ancient machinery inside a war none of them had chosen. Just Harper. Tired, brave, too intelligent to let herself hope easily. And standing here beside him in a lie that had started to feel warmer than lies were supposed to. He heard himself speak before the plan caught up. I choose her in danger, Mason said. Harper's eyes widened. The herald blinked. It was not the expected formal wording. All around them, listeners stilled just enough to notice the deviation. Then Harper stepped closer and answered in a voice low and steady enough to steady him too. And I choose him when danger is the price. The platform accepted it. Light flashed beneath their feet. Old archive systems, fooled by emotion or legacy or some combination nobody would untangle tonight, recognized the vow as valid. A concealed door opened behind the ceremonial dais. Ethan breathed out over comms. Well, that was either beautiful or a paperwork nightmare. They moved through the hidden passage before anyone could challenge them. The archive corridor beyond was quiet, circular, and lined with suspended relic cases glowing under pale fields. Ancient seals turned slowly in the air. Harper's pendant warmed at once, tugging her toward the central vault. Mason stayed close, pulse loud in his ears, one hand near the weapon hidden beneath his coat. You realize, Harper said softly as they walked, that was not the script. I panicked elegantly. You absolutely did not. At the vault door, she laid her hand over the command plate. The pendant answered. Gold light raced through the seams, and the lock opened with a deep mechanical sigh. Inside, the Nexus coordinates bloomed above a crystal pedestal as a living star map, impossible and beautiful and terrifyingly real. Then the alarms began. Back in the ballroom, someone had finally noticed the records conflict. Jax came over comms with delighted outrage. Good news. We have the coordinates. Bad news. Your wedding just crashed the tax registry. Boots thundered in the outer hall. Mason grabbed the data core. Harper spun toward the opposite exit, where a side path opened into a gravity garden filled with floating glass trees and suspended pools. Security forces rushed in from behind just as Mason and Harper leaped into the impossible garden together. The first shots shattered the stars above them. War did not stay dramatic forever. After enough running, enough close calls, enough names whispered over dead channels, it settled into habits. That was the cruel part. People could get used to almost anything, even living in motion, even sleeping light, even teaching children which floorboards creaked in safe houses they would only call home for 3 weeks. Starfong changed names 3 times in 4 years. On one route, she was a freight hauler carrying machine oil and farm tools. On another, she was a relief transport with forged clergy clearance and a hold full of medical grain. Once, for an ugly month near the outer lanes, she posed as a drifting junk tender patched together from 6 different wrecks and 1 bad decision. That version was probably the most honest. Mason Ryder learned how to keep all of it moving. He could rebuild a coolant valve with scrap wire and patience. He could bargain with smugglers who respected nothing but nerve. He could check 3 exits in one glance and know which one Harper would choose before she chose it. Somewhere along the line, He also learned how to rock a child back to sleep while memorizing pursuit vectors, and that skill scared him more than firefights ever had. It meant the impossible had become normal. The children made sure it never became empty. Lila grew first. At 11, she had Harper's eyes, Mason's refusal to back down, and the kind of stillness adults underestimated right up until she disassembled their excuses in complete sentences. Mason found her one morning on a dry riverbed behind a hidden settlement, lying flat on a blanket with an old field scope and a homemade rifle brace. He folded his arms. "You're supposed to be studying." "I am. That's a scope. That's trajectory math." He tried very hard not to look impressed. "You're too young for long-range practice." Without lowering the scope, she said, "Then stop leaving your range notes where I can find them." Harper, standing beside him with 2 mugs of ration tea, quietly said, "I'm not helping you win this." Mason took the mug. "You never do. Not when you're wrong." Lila hit 3 suspended bottle caps in a row from a distance that made Dylan cross-whistle when he came up behind them. "Well," Dylan said, "that's unsettling." Lila lowered the scope. "Thank you." He laughed. "No, kid. I meant for our future enemies." Kai was different. Where Lila sharpened outward, Kai disappeared inward, head full of systems, patterns, and questions adults wished he would stop asking in front of strangers. By 9, he could ghost through half the ship's civilian software and tell Ethan Cole where the weak points were with maddening politeness. He did not enjoy breaking rules nearly as much as he enjoyed understanding why they existed. One night Ethan found him under the comm board with a diagnostic wand in his teeth and a maintenance port open that definitely should not have been open. Ethan crouched. "Want to explain why my relay is having a spiritual crisis?" Kai pulled the wand out of his mouth. "Your relay has lazy encryption. It is military grade." It was military grade. Ethan stared at him for a long moment, then looked up toward the galley. "Harper, your son just insulted my profession." From the next room Harper called back, "Then secure your profession." Mira learned people. Not just words, not just lies, but posture, breath, rhythm, that flicker in someone's face right before fear turned into violence. She could walk into a market stall, a checkpoint line, a church kitchen, a smuggler dock, and tell who was dangerous, who was desperate, and who was pretending to be one so nobody would notice the other. Ava Bennett started teaching her triage young because Mira already knew how to watch a room without looking obvious doing it. At 13, Mira stood in a border clinic wearing borrowed scrubs and whispered to Ava, "Third guard from the left isn't actually watching the door. He's waiting for someone inside to panic first." Ava kept sorting med patches like nothing had happened. "You're sure?" "Pretty sure." 3 minutes later the guard lunged for a forged identity slate instead of the patient line, exactly as Mira predicted. After that, nobody asked whether her instincts were real. Harper changed too, maybe most of all. The visions stopped arriving as random pain and started behaving like whether she could read if she stayed quiet long enough. A pressure behind the eyes before a raid. A ringing note in the pendant before certain routes went bad. Once, in a crowded transport ring over Helios Port, she froze halfway through buying fruit and told Mason they had to leave immediately. "Why?" he asked. "I don't know yet." That was good enough for him. The bomb went off 2 streets over 83 seconds after they cleared the market. That night, alone in their cabin while the children slept 2 decks down, Harper sat on the edge of the bunk with both hands wrapped around a cup of untouched tea. "I hate that I'm becoming useful this way." Mason sat beside her. "You were useful before. You know what I mean?" "Yeah." He did. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Every time it gets clearer, I feel a little less like myself." Mason stayed quiet for a beat, then took the cup from her hands and set it aside. "You're still the woman who beat me at cards by hiding a queen under her sleeve and then argued it was a cultural strategy." A laugh escaped her before she could stop it. "That was one time. It was 6 times. She looked up at him then, tired and beautiful and carrying too much. "What if the visions are changing me?" He touched her cheek gently. "Then I'll learn the changes too." That was the real marriage, he thought. Not vows. Practice. Logan remained a rumor with perfect timing. Sometimes he arrived as a scrambled warning 10 minutes before a customs sweep. Sometimes as a falsified cargo route that saved them 6 days and one likely ambush. Once, during a snowstorm on a mining moon where Mason and Dylan were pinned behind a frozen loader with 3 bounty teams closing in, a fuel rig detonated uphill for no visible reason, scattering their attackers and opening a path straight to extraction. Hours later, Ethan found a burst packet in an abandoned beacon containing exactly 4 words. "Still hate your improvising." Mason read it 3 times before saying anything. Jax Mercer became less human by hardware count and somehow more himself everywhere else. The rebuilt leg had a hydraulic hitch on cold mornings. One eye clicked when he lied badly. His left hand could interface with half the ship and occasionally locked up while he was making a point, which never stopped him from finishing the point. During a bad week on a desert station, with supplies low and tempers snapping, Jax rolled into the galley carrying 3 broken ration heaters and announced, "I regret to inform everyone that morale remains mechanically underqualified." Even Harper laughed at that. Years went like that. Hidden classrooms, fake names, sudden departures before dawn, birthdays celebrated in cargo bays with battery candles and stolen sweetbread. Mason teaching the kids how to spot exits. Harper teaching them how to listen before rooms changed shape. Ava teaching pressure control. Dylan teaching patience with weapons. Ethan teaching codes. Jax teaching sarcasm as a structural support. Then one night, on a rain-lashed refueling platform over the colony world Astor Vale, Harper's pendant went hot against her skin. Ethan's console lit with an incoming burst from a dead channel. And Mason saw the sender tag before anyone spoke. Logan. Astor Vale smelled like wet soil, crushed apple leaves, and the kind of memory that waited years to hit you at the wrong moment. Mason Ryder stood at the edge of the landing field with one duffel over his shoulder and watched early wind move through rows of orchard trees that climbed the low hills beyond the colony. The rain had passed an hour ago, leaving the dirt dark and rich and the old irrigation channels shining silver under a pale afternoon sun. He had not set foot here in 12 years. Somehow the place looked smaller and heavier at the same time. Behind him, Starfong cooled on her landing struts, patched hull streaked with burn scars and fresh mud from the descent. For once the children had open sky over their heads instead of steel, and they were reacting exactly how sheltered war kids would react. Kai had already crouched by a drainage ditch taking apart a broken sensor marker he found, for educational reasons. Mira was halfway up a storage fence because she wanted a better view of the West Ridge. Lila stood still, watching the colony with a rifle case in one hand and Harper's wariness in her eyes. Harper Quinn came up beside Mason and breathed in slowly. "It's beautiful." "Yeah," Mason said. "You don't sound convinced." "I'm trying not to let nostalgia trick me into bad decisions." She glanced at him. "That is one of the most suspiciously mature things I've ever heard you say." He looked at the orchard lines, at the rooftops he once knew by heart, at the distant barn with its leaning weather vanes still somehow alive after all this time. "Give me 10 minutes. I'll ruin it." Dylan Cross hauled a crate down the ramp behind them and muttered, "I already missed the ship. Dirt has opinions." Jax Mercer rolled past on reinforced leg braces and scanned the settlement with his optic flickering blue. "This colony has 12 hidden camera points, 3 bad repair patches, and 1 woman on that porch evaluating us like livestock. I respect her professionalism." Ava Bennett followed with med cases dry as ever. "That's Mason's aunt." Jax paused. "Then the livestock comparison stands." The welcome was polite, which was worse than hostile. People nodded. Some waved. Some pretended not to stare. Every conversation dipped when Mason passed and resumed 2 beats too late. Astor Vale was still free on paper, still too minor to justify full occupation. But pressure lived here now in ration counts, inspections, vanished shipments, and neighbors who looked at each other too carefully before speaking. Fear had not conquered the colony. It had moved in and started paying taxes. Mason found his father near the old processing shed. Fixing a pressure line with the hard economy of movement age gives men who never learned to waste motion. Caleb Ryder looked up once, saw his son, and set the wrench down with deliberate calm. "You took your time," Caleb said. "No hug, no smile, no shock. Mason shifted the duffel off his shoulder. Good to see you too. Caleb's eyes moved past him to Harper, then to the children, then back. You brought a war home. The sentence landed without volume, which made it hit harder. Before Mason could answer, Harper stepped forward. We brought supplies, medical stock, and clean filters. The war was already here. Caleb studied her for a second longer than was comfortable. Then he nodded once, not agreement exactly, but recognition. You must be Harper. I am. I pictured someone shorter. Mason closed his eyes briefly. There he is. The house where Mason grew up still had the same cracked porch rail and the same kitchen window that never shut right in spring. Inside, though, the rooms felt tighter, crowded with stored grain sacks, emergency water, and maps tucked under tablecloths when strangers came by. You could tell which houses expected raids by the way furniture had been arranged to clear fast paths to back exits. At dinner, the old tension got worse before it got honest. Lila watched everyone with unsettling patience. Kai kept asking what the subfloor vents connected to. Mira noticed which names made adults go quiet. Harper ate slowly and listened harder than anyone else in the room. Caleb finally set down his cup and looked at Mason. How many enemy eyes followed you here? Mason answered just as flatly. None that lived. That's not the same thing. No, Mason said. It isn't. Silence stretched. Then the front door opened without a knock, and a broad-shouldered woman in orchard boots stepped in carrying a weather scanner and a sidearm. Nora Bell, Mason's childhood friend. First person he ever lost a fistfight to. Last person he expected to see still standing in this kitchen. She stopped dead. Well, hell. Mason got to his feet, surprised into something close to a smile. Nora. She looked him over, taking in the scars, the tiredness, the years. You got old. You got rude. Stayed efficient. Then her expression shifted as she spotted the hidden rifles near the wall, the strange pendant at Harper's throat, and the children who carried themselves like people raised to duck first and ask later. Nora set the weather scanner on the table. Scouts hit the South Ridge this morning. The whole room went still. Caleb swore under his breath. Ava looked up sharply. Dylan stopped pretending to be relaxed. Even Jax, who had been quietly stealing pickled vegetables with mechanical precision, froze halfway through the jar. Uniformed? Mason asked. Nora nodded. Not enough to hold ground. Enough to count doors. They're probing. Harper touched the edge of the table with 2 fingers, eyes unfocusing for half a heartbeat. Mason saw it happen and hated that he recognized it now. What? He asked. She looked toward the back hall. This place is hiding something they already suspect exists. Caleb's face changed. That was all the answer anyone needed. The tunnels, Mason said. Nobody moved. Then Nora leaned back and crossed her arms. Congratulations. You remembered your own childhood. Of course there were tunnels. The old irrigation caverns under the orchards had been expanded over decades into storm shelters, smuggling lanes, storage pockets, and escape paths half the colony had used at one time or another. Mason had played in those passages as a kid with muddy knees and zero imagination for future empire problems. Now those same tunnels meant civilians could disappear if the colony fell, or get trapped if the enemy found the entrances first. Before the argument could start, a knock hit the back door. Not polite, patterned. 3 fast, 2 slow, 1 hard. Mason went cold. He knew that rhythm. So did Harper, judging by the way her head snapped up. Caleb reached for the shotgun near the pantry. Mason was already moving, hand near his sidearm, every nerve awake. He opened the back door and found an enemy trooper standing in the rain-dark yard in black armor streaked with orchard mud. For one impossible second, Mason only saw the uniform. Then the figure pulled off the helmet. Logan Pierce looked older, thinner, meaner around the mouth, and so alive Mason's body forgot what emotion was supposed to come first. Mason hit him before words happened. Not a punch. A shove hard enough to slam Logan against the porch post. Fury came with it, and relief, and the ugly shock of loving someone you had already grieved. You son of a... Logan grabbed his coat and dragged him into a rough embrace that felt like impact more than comfort. "Yeah," Logan said hoarsely. "Missed you too." Inside the house, Harper closed her eyes for one single beat, like a prayer had just arrived late. Then sirens began to wail from the colony square. Nora turned toward the window. Scouts just lit the alarm net. Jax rose with a grimace and a weapon in hand. "I would like one peaceful family moment before civilization ends, but apparently scheduling hates me." Outside, across the darkening orchard, floodlights snapped on over the first hidden tunnel entrance. The vault started fighting before they even reached the inner gate. Mason Ryder hit the floor behind a fractured pillar as a line of white fire sliced across the corridor where his head had been half a second earlier. The air smelled like burning metal, ionized dust, and old stone waking up angry. Ahead, the breach team moved through a storm of sparks and shifting geometry. Boots pounding black glass panels that kept rearranging their seams like the floor could not decide what shape it wanted to be. "Right lane," Dylan Cross shouted, dropping to one knee and firing 3 clean bursts into a descending drone cluster. The machines burst apart in sprays of silver fragments that rained across the corridor like hot sleet. Logan Pierce was already moving left. Enemy rifle stolen 2 levels earlier tucked hard into his shoulder. "This place has more backup systems than a paranoid god." "That is because paranoid gods usually hired the architects," Jax Mercer said over comms. He was somewhere behind them, half inside a smoking interface pit, one cybernetic hand buried in the wall up to the wrist. Sparks showered around his shoulders as he snarled at the code stream flickering over his optic. Also, whoever designed these control hierarchies hated technicians personally. "I respect the commitment. I reject the formatting." A blast shook the passage. Harper Quinn braced herself against the wall with one hand, the pendant at her throat burning bright enough to throw gold across her face. Her visions had gotten them this far, through 3 false corridors, 2 nested kill zones, and 1 sealed gate that only opened when she whispered a phrase no one else could hear in the air. But now the fortress was waking faster than they were clearing it. Mira slid a drone swarm through a split in the ceiling and called from the rear team, 2 enforcer squads rotating from the west ring. "They're trying to fold around us." "Not if we fold first," Ethan Cole replied over the command channel from Starfong above, voice clipped and layered with live tactical feeds. "I'm feeding their internal grid a fake breach on the southern archive stair." Kai, crouched beside a portable relay, grinned without looking up. "I can make that worse." He drove a spike into the relay board. Instantly, half the corridor lights died, then came back red. Enemy markers blinked, shuffled, and doubled on their own displays. Lila Ryder stepped past Mason and fired through the confusion with calm, economical bursts that made him flash for one painful instant to a little girl stealing range notes off his desk. She was taller now, faster, steadier than any parent should be comfortable with. She dropped 1 enforcer, pivoted, and clipped another in the shoulder seam. "Dad," she said, not taking her eyes off the smoke. "You can have the proud moment later." Mason almost laughed. Then Harper made a sound that froze his blood. Not fear. Pain. He turned so fast his rifle nearly slipped. She had both hands on her stomach now, face drained white under soot and sweat. For one crazy second he thought she had been hit and he had somehow missed it. Then another contraction hit, and her knees buckled. "Oh no," Ava Bennett said, already moving. Mason was beside Harper before the thought finished forming. "Talk to me." Harper grabbed the front of his armor and sucked in a breath through clenched teeth. "I would love," she said, voice shaking, "for this child to stop choosing dramatic timing." Everything in him split at once. Commander, husband, target, shield. The corridor thundered around them. Gunfire cracked. Alarms sang in 3 languages and 1 machine tone that made the pendant flare hotter. Somewhere beyond the next blast door, the inner vault mechanisms were turning, drawn awake by bloodlines none of them fully understood. Ava scanned Harper and looked up with zero softness left in her expression. "She's in active labor." Mason stared at her. "Now?" Ava gave him the look medics used when reality had already answered stupid questions. That is generally how labor works. Logan took one glance at Mason's face and stepped into the gap instantly. Go! Mason looked at him, torn open by instinct. Logan pointed his rifle toward the collapsing archway ahead. I have the line. You have her. Don't make me say it twice. That was the twin thing. Not mind reading. Recognition. Logan knew exactly how much this cost and decided anyway. Mason nodded once and turned back to Harper as Ava and Dylan dragged a shattered command slab sideways, making a rough pocket behind overturned plating. Jack skidded a maintenance sled into place with med packs, cables, and a sheet of smart fabric. I have built many terrible field solutions, Jax announced. This one is by far the least spiritually appropriate. Ava ignored him and got to work. Mira, I need drone lights here. Kai, patch me environmental readings. Lila, hold that corridor. Riley, with me. Riley Shaw hesitated only a fraction. The vault had been needling him since they entered. Every old seal, every pulse through the walls, every hidden line of command recognized something in his blood that he did not want and did not trust. Mason had seen the fear in him. The old legacy wanted heirs. Riley looked like a man who would have preferred anonymity forever. Then he made his choice. He holstered the sidearm, dropped to one knee beside Ava, and passed her sterile wraps with shaking but steady hands. Tell me what you need. Outside the improvised med corner, the fight got uglier. Logan ran it with brutal efficiency, pulling Dylan into rotating angles while Ethan fed him shifting routes from orbit. Lila anchored the near approach and refused to give an inch. Myra's drones laced the smoke with green markers so friendly fire did not turn disaster into catastrophe. Kai piggybacked on the fortress maintenance net and started turning service doors into traps. Jax slammed his hand deeper into a sparking wall port and hissed as old code bit back. Oh, now it wants authentication. That's rich. The building is actively on fire and suddenly cares about procedure. Then Harper cried out again. The pendant exploded with light. Not a flash, a surge. Gold-white veins ran through the floor, up the walls, across shattered statues and sealed consoles. Hidden rings beneath the chamber began to rotate with a grinding, ancient power. Symbols unfolded overhead in vast luminous circles, bloodline chains branching into maps, command trees, and names erased from history, but somehow still alive inside the machine. The whole fortress answered her. Riley looked up, stunned. It knows. Harper's voice came ragged, furious, and strangely certain all at once. No, she whispered. It remembers. The chamber shook so hard dust burst from the ceiling in gray curtains. Stone-faced guardian figures split apart, revealing dormant weapon spines inside. Crystal barriers around the inner sanctum flickered, destabilized, and failed in sheets of falling light. Barrier down, Logan shouted. Enemy fire surged. So do we, Dylan yelled back. The family moved on instinct. Lila and Logan punched through the opening. Mira painted safe lanes through falling debris. Kai drove a command pulse through the awakened network and half the fortress defense grid turned inward on its current masters. Riley stood, snatched up his weapon, and covered the med position with the face of a man who had finally decided which side of his own blood he served. Mason stayed with Harper through every impossible second. He held her hand, wiped sweat from her brow, let her crush his wrist when another contraction hit. Around them, battle and birth braided together until they were the same terrible, holy thing. Ava looked up once, eyes sharp and sure. One more push, Harper screamed. At the exact same instant, the inner vault doors blasted open, enemy resistance broke, and a newborn cry cut through the chamber clean as light. For one breath, everyone froze. Then something deep beneath the fortress answered with a sound like a world-sized heart taking its first beat in 1,000 years. Space stopped behaving before the shooting even started. Starfong dropped out of its final jump into a battlefield that looked like someone had taken the rules of physics, fed them through a grinder, and scattered the pieces across a star system. Distances stretched wrong. Light bent in slow curls around invisible edges. Ships that should have been 10 miles away looked close enough to touch, then flickered and snapped backward into the dark. Timestamps on tactical screens stumbled over themselves. Sensor ghosts multiplied, died, and returned wearing the signatures of friendly craft that had never been there. For one ugly second, Mason Ryder thought his eyes were failing. Then Ethan Cole swore over comms, which was reassuring in its own way. "It's not us," Ethan said from the bridge pit, hands flying over the relay console. "Or it is us, but it's also everybody else. Their engines are folding vector confidence and feed integrity at the same time." Dylan Cross looked at the forward display and grimaced. "You know what I miss? Normal death." Starfong groaned as warped gravity rolled past the hull like thunder through metal bones. On the command deck, red lights slid over battered consoles and sleepless faces. Harper Quinn stood near the center rail with the pendant burning faintly at her throat. One hand braced against the chart table, eyes fixed on the impossible architecture ahead. The Nexus. It hung in space like a wound ringed in geometry. Great circular structures turned through one another at angles no sane engineer would design, wrapped in curtains of bent light and black gold energy. Enemy warships drifted around it in layered formations that seemed stable only until you looked twice. Between them moved the distortion engines, cathedral-sized structures that warped identity tags, range data, and causality itself. Mason exhaled slowly. So the usual plan of shooting the biggest problem first is off the table. Tragically, Jax Mercer said, rolling a cable spool under one arm and a portable interface under the other. The biggest problem appears to be reality. Lila Ryder stood at auxiliary strike control, jaw set, eyes calm in the way that always made Mason proud and uneasy at the same time. Kai and Mira worked the drone lattice together, flooding local displays with hand-built reference grids that kept shifting as the battlefield shifted with them. Ava Bennett moved between command and med support with that same clipped precision she brought to everything from triage to emotional shutdowns. Logan Pierce entered from the aft hatch carrying 2 cups of coffee and the expression of a man who had already decided the next idea was terrible and was going to do it anyway. He handed one to Mason. "You're making that face." Mason took the cup. "What face?" "The one that means either genius or trauma is about to happen." Harper looked up from the tactical projection. "Probably both." That got half a laugh, which was enough. Another pulse rolled through space. 3 Allied frigates on the outer line appeared to freeze, then smear into elongated shapes before snapping back into place with different headings. A squadron opened fire on a target that wasn't there. One pilot screamed over open comms that he had just watched his own ship explode 5 seconds in the future. Ethan muted the channel. "If we keep fighting by instrument confidence, we lose. If we go visual, we lose slower," Dylan said. Harper touched the edge of the table, and the pendant flared. The star map changed. Not the physical one, the understanding of it. Mason saw it happen in her face before the data reflected it. "They're not just scrambling us," she said quietly. "They're forcing us to overvalue certainty." Logan and Mason looked at each other. That was all it took. Not telepathy, not destiny. Just 2 brothers who had spent their lives translating reckless instinct into workable disaster. Mason set the coffee down. "Then we stop giving them anything stable to solve." Ethan blinked. Then his whole posture sharpened. "You want to poison the battlefield with contradictions." Logan's grin was thin and dangerous. "I want to make their predictive systems feel stupid." Jack straightened. "Finally, a strategy one can respect emotionally." Orders ripped across the resistance net. Not clear ones. Not efficient ones. Deliberately ugly ones. Ethan seeded 3 overlapping retreat vectors into open channels, then embedded fake panic bursts inside them. Cargo barges dumped heat decoys in drifting prayer wheel formations. Civilian skiffs ran straight through lanes no sane military planner would assign them, because Mira had marked those lanes as emotionally low value in the enemy's own threat weighting. Kai flooded local bands with false ship IDs that aged, healed, and changed damage profiles every few seconds, forcing hostile systems to recalculate constantly against moving lies. On the tactical board, Allied formations began to look insane. That was the point. Lila took a strike wing through a fracture seam between 2 distortion blooms, not because the route made sense, but because it looked so irrational no command algorithm would prioritize it in time. Dylan followed with gunships broadcasting the signature of a crippled fuel convoy. Ava coordinated med extraction shuttles that doubled as signal anchors, giving human pilots real reference points based on trust instead of corrupted telemetry. Harper closed her eyes. The pendant pulsed brighter. "What do you see?" Mason asked. She opened them slowly. Not thoughts. Habits. Around the Nexus, ancient command systems nested under enemy control architecture like old bones under scar tissue. Harper could feel their responses now, not language exactly, more preference. The system favored hierarchy, confirmation, obedience, recursive validation. It hated ambiguity. It hated divided authority. It hated humans, which meant it had a weakness. "Ethan," Harper said, voice sharpening, "mirror every valid command with a slight emotional mismatch. Not enough to reject it. Enough to make it hesitate." There was a beat of silence. Then Ethan let out a breath. "That is horrifying. Can you do it?" "I'm offended you even have to ask." He did. Enemy targeting trees began to stall. Confirmation loops doubled back. Defensive rings shifted a half-second late. Two Overlord cruisers responded to each other's fake priority flags and nearly rammed at sublight. One distortion engine pivoted to counter a decoy squadron and folded its own escort wing into a broken gravity pocket. Jax watched the returns and gave a satisfied nod. There it is. Fatal dependency issues. Starfang surged through the widening confusion. Mason and Logan worked the bridge like a shared weapon. Mason called real vectors. Logan fed fake intent into resistance movement patterns, making human forces appear more coordinated in the wrong places and less coordinated in the right ones. It was not a bluff built on looking strong. It was built on looking impossible to model. The enemy could beat fleets. They could beat doctrine. They could not beat a family trusting each other faster than a machine could think. Then the center of the Nexus opened. Not exploded. Opened. Rings peeled apart around a core of pulsing light wrapped in dark lattice. Something vast and alive-looking, as if a star had been taught to remember. Every screen on the bridge flickered white gold. Every pendant shard and archive trace aboard Starfang reacted at once. The newborn in the rear cradle started crying. Harper staggered, one hand against her chest, face gone pale. Mason caught her. "Harper." Her eyes were fixed on the impossible heart of the Nexus. When she spoke, her voice sounded like fear finally reaching the bottom of itself. "We can't take it by force," she whispered. "If we touch it wrong, we don't just lose the war." The Genesis heart pulsed again, and half the battlefield disappeared. The chamber around the Genesis heart looked alive in the worst possible way. Nothing in it felt assembled. No seams, no bolts, no clear engineering logic. The walls rose in black gold curves like cooled lightning, shot through with deep veins of light that pulsed in slow, memory-like rhythms. Platforms grew out of the floor instead of standing on it. Suspended rings turned overhead without visible support, their surfaces covered in moving script that shifted shape whenever anyone looked straight at it. It felt less like entering a control room and more like walking into the inside of a thought so old it had forgotten planets. Mason Ryder hit the final platform at a run, boots slamming against a surface that flexed almost imperceptibly under impact. Behind him came Logan Pierce, Dylan Cross, Riley Shaw, and Lila Ryder in a staggered wedge. Weapons up, breathing hard, faces striped by alternating light and shadow. Over comms, Ethan Cole was juggling collapsing feeds, pulse distortions, and enemy command chatter with the strained focus of a man actively bullying reality into staying legible. "Bridge to ground team," Ethan said in their ears. "I have maybe 30% map confidence and rising spiritual resentment." Jax Mercer's voice snapped in over a secondary channel. "That makes two of us. These systems are old enough to consider passwords a moral issue." Ahead, the chamber opened around the heart. It hung in the center like a star caught mid-beat, wrapped in dark lattice and great arcs of suspended geometry that turned with tidal slowness. White gold light moved inside it in massive, elegant pulses, each one radiating across the chamber and through the architecture beyond. Around that brilliance stood the Overlord's final shell of control. Floating command halos, shielded nodes, ritual pylons, and a throne frame built from stolen bloodline conduits jammed directly into the room like invasive roots. And at the center of all of it stood the Overlord. He no longer looked fully organic. Armor and body had fused into something ceremonial and monstrous. A figure wrapped in white plates and black circuitry, suspended an inch above the floor by fields that crackled around his limbs. His face remained visible, which somehow made him worse. He wanted to be seen. Wanted the family to understand that this was not desperation in his mind. This was ascension. Harper Quinn stepped forward beside Mason, pendant burning at her throat, face pale but steady. "You don't belong here." The Overlord smiled without warmth. "Belonging is the language of people who arrive late." He raised one hand. The chamber folded. A force wave ripped across the platform, bending distance just enough to break formation. Mason felt the floor lurch sideways under him. Lila vanished from his peripheral vision and reappeared 10 feet farther left. Dylan hit one knee and fired through the distortion on instinct alone. Riley barely cleared a rising line of black crystal before it speared up where his chest had been. "Mood," Jax muttered over comms. "The room is definitely hostile." Ava Bennett was not in the chamber proper, but her voice came through anyway from the triage point 2 levels back, sharp and controlled. "Status. Still irritatingly alive," Dylan grunted. "That is not a medical category." "It should be." Mason and Logan moved without discussion. Mason cut right toward the first halo node while Logan shifted left, drawing fire and feeding angles in clipped bursts only his brother would fully understand. "High arc. Scene. Drop on 2. Already there." This was not some mystical twin magic. It was repetition, trust, old pain, and years of surviving each other's thinking at combat speed. The Overlord struck with force and design. The brothers answered with a pattern too human to optimize. Adaptive, messy, and intimate. Harper did not follow them. For once, she stopped trying to act like the inheritance was something to apologize for. She stepped into the center circle, lifted one hand toward the heart, and let the pendant blaze. The chamber answered instantly. Lines of old command lit under the floor. Hidden script surfaced across the throne pylons. Somewhere deep inside the system, ancient pathways woke and began searching for rightful inputs the Overlord had spent years trying to counterfeit. He turned on her with real anger then. "You are an accident of proximity." Harper's voice came back calm enough to cut. "That's still more honest than theft." Riley heard it too. Heard the old architecture responding. Heard, maybe for the first time, that the line was not about privilege. It was about burden. About being recognized by systems built to ask who would carry consequence instead of who would seize control. He looked at the heart. At Harper. At the command conduits fused into the Overlord's frame. Then he holstered his fear. "I'm done letting dead tyrants define my blood," Riley said and drove forward. He hit the secondary pylon hard, slammed an override spike into its seam, and shouted something in old royal cadence that Harper had taught him 3 nights earlier in case they ever got this far. The pylon flared. The command halo above the Overlord stuttered. On the rear line, Lila steadied the team. She was too young for this. Everyone knew it. No one had the luxury of changing it. She anchored the chamber approach with 3 brutal, efficient shots that kept incoming enforcers from folding around Dylan's flank. Mira, feeding from a remote drone cluster, painted shifting movement lanes in green through the distortion. Kai piggybacked on Ethan's battlefield patchwork and turned their markers into live confidence beacons that humans could follow when machines could not. "Left threshold collapsing," Kai warned. "Compensating," Mira said. "Compensate faster. I'm literally 12 interfaces ahead of you." "That is not the compliment you think it is." Dylan barked a laugh and fired again. Jax, deep inside the system through a hijacked service spine, found the cruel little opening he'd been hunting. "Oh, that is adorable," he said. He registered himself as a permanent executive layer. Narcissism remains the galaxy's most consistent coding flaw. "Can you use it?" Mason snapped, sliding under a blast of white force and driving his rifle stock into a node housing. Jax's chuckle was all blades. "Watch me demote a god." He punched the command through. Across the chamber, the old architecture accepted the request not as rebellion, but as maintenance. Warning sigils flashed red. The throne frame around the Overlord reevaluated him, traced stolen pathways, flagged mismatched lineage, detected coercive override loops, and did the one thing tyrants never believe systems will do to them. Classified him as corruption. The room changed sides. Shield halos flickered and died. The floating pylons pivoted away from Harper and toward the Overlord. The conduits feeding his armor seized, constricted, and began ripping themselves free with showers of violent light. For the first time, he looked afraid. "No," he said, and now he sounded human in the ugliest way. "No, I built this access. I paid for it." The heart pulsed once. Mason and Logan hit him together. Not with symmetry, with trust. Mason drove high, drawing the last defensive field. Logan came low through the break Mason created and shattered the final command ring at the Overlord's side. Riley hit the exposed conduit junction. Harper stepped into the opening they made and laid her palm against the central interface. The chamber held its breath. Then the Genesis heart chose. Light erupted outward, not wild but deliberate, wrapping Harper, touching Riley, moving past Mason and Logan without harm, and then slamming into the Overlord like judgment finally arriving with paperwork. His stolen architecture tore free in a storm of white shards. The throne frame rejected him so completely it looked personal. He screamed as the heart threw him backward off the dais and into the collapsing dark beyond. Enemy signals across the Nexus began to fail. On Ethan's board, fleet formations broke apart. Weapon locks dissolved. Throne relays went silent one by one. Mason turned toward Harper as the chamber shook around them. She was still standing. Barely. The heart hovered above her in terrible, beautiful light, no longer contained by the old lattice, no longer merely a weapon or a relic. It looked awake, aware, choosing. Harper looked up at it, eyes wide with dawning fear. "Mason," she whispered, "I don't think it's ending." Then every dead screen in the chamber lit with a signal from somewhere beyond known space. Morning came to the broken fortress slowly, like the galaxy itself was afraid to move too fast and wake the nightmare back up. The sky above the shattered towers had finally settled into one honest color. Smoke drifted in thin gray ribbons through the gaps where command spires used to stand, and sunlight spilled across cracked platforms, burnt armor, broken drones, and the stunned faces of people who had survived long enough to hear silence return. Not clean silence. Not peaceful silence. The kind that comes after too much noise, when everyone is still waiting for the next blast and slowly realizing there might not be one. Mason Ryder stood on the eastern terrace with his daughter in his arms and his son asleep in a sling against Harper Quinn's chest. The newborn had finally stopped crying sometime before dawn, worn out by entering existence in the middle of a collapsing empire. Mason understood the feeling. Harper leaned into him, exhausted clear down to the bone. Her hair loose around her shoulders, dried blood and soot still marking the collar of her armor. She looked like every hard year had found her at once. She also looked unbreakable. "You should sit down," Mason said softly. "You have been saying that for 9 hours. Because you keep ignoring me. That is one of the things you love most about me." He glanced at her, and despite everything, despite the dead and the smoke and the giant impossible thing still humming below the fortress, she was right. Top 3 easily. That earned him the ghost of a smile. A few yards away, Lila sat cross-legged on a crate with a field blanket around her shoulders and a rifle within arm's reach because of course it was. Kai was rebuilding a scorched drone housing with Mira peering over his shoulder and correcting him every 30 seconds. They looked exhausted, too young, and terribly alive. Mason kept having to look at them again, just to confirm they were still there. "Your solder point is crooked," Mira said. Kai frowned. "No, it's compensating. It's ugly. It's functional. That's what ugly things say." On the steps below, Ava Bennett moved through a line of survivors with med tape, scanner light, and that same flat comm she had used in bunkers, ships, ruins, and burning hallways for years. Dylan Cross was helping stack ration crates beside a cracked archway while arguing with a local dock worker about whether powdered eggs counted as a crime. Nearby, Ethan Cole knelt by a portable array, eyes red from too many hours on live channels, keeping half the liberated system stitched together through relay updates and emergency traffic. And beside Mason, close enough that their shoulders almost touched without either of them commenting on it, Logan Pierce stood looking out over the ruined citadel. No disguises, no stolen armor, no false name, just Logan again, or at least the version War had returned. He looked leaner than memory, sharper around the eyes, carrying new scars that caught the morning light like pale seams. Mason still had not fully adjusted to the fact that his brother occupied physical space again. Every time he glanced sideways and saw him there, some broken interior part of him tried to restart. Logan noticed the look without turning. "If you keep checking whether I'm real, I'm charging rent." Mason snorted. "You'd overprice it. I have premium survival value. That is not a market category. It is now." The easy rhythm of it hit harder than either of them let show. Below the terrace, the liberated survivors had begun the oldest possible human ritual after disaster. They were feeding people. Someone found flatbread. Someone else found broth. Somebody located contraband coffee that tasted like rust and hope. Food moved hand to hand through soldiers, civilians, medics, defectors, mechanics, and children too dazed to ask whether the day was truly theirs. Names were spoken for the dead before anyone dared use the word victory. Riley Shaw handled that part. He stood at the center of the lower court, one hand resting on the old command seal he had reclaimed and never once worn like a crown. The crowd around him was mixed in every way the Empire had spent generations trying to erase. Freed labor crews, resistance cells, former throne conscripts, colony fighters, archive keepers, and people who had just happened to still be alive when the wall came down. "We name them," Riley said, voice rough but carrying. "All of them. The ones who fought. The ones who hid others. The ones who broke orders. The ones who never got to see this morning." And they did. One by one, in 100 accents, through tears and anger and long stretches of breath where speaking was hard, the names went out across the court and into the wind. No banners. No speeches about glory. Just witness. Harper listened with her eyes closed. Mason felt the newborn stir against her and opened a hand over the baby's back. Such a tiny weight. Such a ridiculous reason to keep fighting. Such a perfect one. Jax Mercer rolled up with a ration tin balanced on one knee and examined the family like a man performing highly skeptical maintenance on a miracle. "You're all still vertical," he said. "That continues to strike me as statistically rude." Lila laughed first, sudden and cracked around the edges. Then Mira. Then Kai. Even Ava smiled without admitting it. The laughter spread because it had to. Because grief and relief were sharing the same air and something in the human body insists on making space somehow. Jax popped open the ration tin and peered inside. "Excellent. Victory stew. Tastes like poor decisions and trace minerals." Dylan pointed a spoon at him. "That is every stew you've ever made. And yet you survive them. Inspirational." For a little while that was enough. The court breathed. People ate. Children slept on borrowed coats. Someone started quietly retuning a cracked string instrument near the western stair. The fortress still smelled like ozone, burnt stone, and fresh bandages, but morning had gotten all the way in now, filling broken spaces with ordinary light. Then Harper stiffened. Mason felt it immediately. "What?" She looked toward the chamber beneath the court where the Genesis heart remained suspended in the ruins of the final vault. "It's awake," she whispered. "Not active. Awake." Down below, light pulsed once through the cracks in the floor, white gold and deliberate. Then again, not fading, not powering down. The rhythm was too steady, too aware, too much like a living thing testing the edges of its own silence. Riley looked up from the gathering. Logan straightened. Ethan's console chirped sharply from across the terrace. "I'm getting a signal," Ethan said. No one moved at first. The phrase had become a curse in their lives. He looked down at the display, and whatever color remained in his face disappeared. This isn't local. It's not even sector range. Harper stepped toward him, the pendant at her throat already beginning to glow. Mason followed, every instinct in him tightening all over again. The portable screen flickered. For a heartbeat it showed only static, deep black, and drifting bands of impossible code. Then coordinates began to resolve across the display. Not frontier markers. Not old imperial routes. Something farther out. Past mapped lanes. Past old archive boundaries. Past anywhere humans or their enemies were supposed to know how to reach. Ethan's voice dropped. This is coming from beyond known space. At the same moment, the Genesis heart pulsed harder beneath their feet. Every relic fragment in the court reacted. Harper grabbed Mason's wrist. The newborn started crying. And from the screen, through static that sounded almost like breathing, a voice began to speak. The archive ship drifted in the quiet dark beyond the main lanes, where trade beacons thinned out and stars looked less like destinations and more like witnesses. Its hull was long, silver, and scarred by age rather than war, preserved instead of rebuilt, as if the people who kept it understood that history should still show where it had been hit. Along the docking spine, old Terran lettering glowed softly beneath fresh sealant. Starfong Memorial Archive. Mason Ryder stepped through the airlock first. Cold preserved air met her face, carrying metal, dust, recycled oxygen, and that faint paper-dry smell old ships got when they held more memory than traffic. Behind her came Jonah Pierce, broad-shouldered and perpetually unimpressed by ceremonial rules. Mara Quinn, who read rooms the way some people read maps, and Eli Shaw, who had inherited the unfortunate family trait of looking calm right before doing something reckless. Soft lights woke under their boots as they crossed into the entry hall. Still dramatic, Jonah said. Arya ran her fingers over the wall plating as she walked. It's an archive ship. Drama is the point. No, Mara said, eyeing the vaulted ceiling. Documentation is the point. Drama is apparently hereditary. Eli stopped at the first transparent display case and whistled under his breath. Inside floated a patched flight glove, a cracked field scope, and a scorched ration tin with handwritten marker across the lid. Do not let JX cook unsupervised. Jonah grinned. See? Finally, a sacred text. The corridor opened into the hall of continuance, and all four airs slowed without meaning to. The chamber rose through 3 decks beneath a crystal dome full of stars. Suspended in invisible fields were the objects public history always mentioned and the smaller ones it never did. Pendants glimmered in dim gold. Broken command seals floated beside ship tags, med scanners, repair tools, and a child's cloth box with one mismatched button eye. There were rifles, yes. Fragments of crown architecture, yes. But also recipe slates, school tablets, patched boots, hand-drawn route maps, festival ribbons, and one bent spoon tagged with 3 lines of text explaining that it had once carried a coded message through an occupied intake line. Mara stared at that one the longest. That's the thing no empire ever understands. What? Eli asked. She folded her arms. History gets moved by small objects in stubborn hands. A nearby plinth lit as their IDs registered family access. Audio files unfolded in the air around them. Not loud, just close enough to feel personal. Mason laughing somewhere off mic, Harper correcting him. Logan and Dylan arguing over whether a cargo door had been strategically encouraged or blown apart by stupidity. Ava telling someone to sit down before she sedated them out of principle. None of it sounded legendary. Sounded tired, affectionate, and real. Arya swallowed and moved on. Public memorials had always made her ancestors feel huge. All posture and firelight and impossible courage. Here they felt reachable. Human. The difference hit harder than she expected. They entered the domestic gallery next, and Jonah stopped dead in front of a wall of children's drawings. There were starships shaped like lopsided bread loaves, purple orchard trees under 3 moons, a family portrait where half the adults had clearly been drawn from memory and the other half from emotional complaint. One picture showed a crude battle scene with arrows everywhere and a note in the corner written in huge messy letters. MOM said NO grenades in the kitchen. Eli leaned in. Who wrote that? Arya checked the tag. Kai. Age 7. Mara laughed into her hand. That feels historically important. Beyond the drawings stood a small room behind transparent amber glass. The vow chamber. Not grand. Not royal. Just an old wood table. 2 preserved cups. 1 flickering lamp. And the private recording index only family descendants could unlock. Arya hesitated, then touched the access ring. The lights softened. A voice came first, low and amused. Mason, if anyone in our line ever turns this room into a shrine, I'm haunting them. Harper answered immediately, warm with exhaustion and a smile you could hear. You are already impossible enough alive. Don't threaten overtime. A baby fussed somewhere in the background. Someone farther off, maybe Logan, shouted that if they took much longer he was claiming the good dessert. Mason muttered, see? This is why secrecy matters. And Harper laughed softly. The kind of laugh people only have when they are finally with the person they stopped pretending not to need. Jonah looked away first. Not out of embarrassment. Out of respect. When the recording ended, the room stayed quiet long enough for the ship's low systems hum to feel almost sacred. So that's it, Eli said at last. That's what all the statues miss. Arya nodded. They didn't save everything because they were fearless. They saved it because they kept choosing each other while being scared. They moved into the last chamber together. This one held the high relics. Pendant arrays, battle fragments, coded archive crystals, repaired command plates, and, centered beneath a clear field dome, a preserved personality matrix labeled JX Mercer. Restoration build 9.6, interactive family access only. Beneath the plaque someone long ago had added a handwritten note in marker. He would have hated the plaque. Jonah pressed the activation stud before anyone could stop him. Static snapped. Blue light assembled. A lean holographic figure resolved over the pedestal, part man, part machine. One eye brighter than the other, posture radiating permanent skepticism. Jax looked around, expression flat. Well, either civilization survived, or nepotism finally achieved sentience. Mara burst out laughing. The hologram turned his head toward Jonah. You have pierced shoulders and bad impulse control. My condolences to your instructors. Jonah placed a hand over his chest. I knew we were connected. You are all connected, Jax said dryly. That was the entire problem and also the only solution. Arya stepped closer to the relic field. We came to see what was true. Jax's hologram shifted, gaze moving from the pendants to the old command fragments to the family drawings on the outer wall. For the first time, the sarcasm eased. What was true, he said, is that they were ordinary enough to get tired, scared, jealous, stubborn, and hungry at the exact wrong moments. Then they kept going anyway. Very rude of them, honestly. Eli smiled. That old line people use. Soul bluffed the cosmos. Jax gave a small shrug. Accurate. Humans didn't win by being pure or chosen or tidy. They won because they kept improvising meaning faster than fear could standardize them. The chamber trembled. Every pendant in the room flared at once. The lights over the relic cases shifted from museum gold to alert white. A low tone rolled through the ship. Arya felt the hair rise on her arms as the dome above them brightened. Stars outside sliding slightly out of their expected positions. Not moving naturally. Aligning. Mara looked up first. That's not normal. No, Eli said, staring at a bloom of coordinates spreading across the floor in pale light. It really isn't. The central archive console woke on its own. Ancient symbols climbed the glass. The preserved battle records started cross-referencing with a signal pattern no current map should have recognized. Jax's hologram turned toward the stars beyond the dome and let out a long, mechanical sigh. I was hoping the antiques would stay emotionally retired, he said. Arya stepped toward the console as the pendant field reacted to her presence. The old line, the one people quoted in speeches and family halls and military oaths, finally landed in her chest with its full weight. Humans soul bluffed the cosmos. Not with dominance. Not with destiny. With nerve, loyalty, improvisation, and the stubborn refusal to let love become strategically irrelevant. The signal deepened. Outside the dome, Distant stars bent into a shape the archive systems clearly remembered. Arya looked at the new route unfolding across the floor and felt history stop being finished. "It's opening again," she whispered. And somewhere beyond the mapped dark, the first voyage began to call its heirs forward.